Hello and welcome to the Zeke podcast. I am Zeke, and on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the word jurisdiction. And this topic for me was inspired by my continued reading of this book right here, "Tattoos on the Heart: The Power of Boundless Compassion" by Father Gregory Boyles of Homeboy Industries. And chapter 6 of the book is titled Jurisdiction. And at some point, I am going to read a few passages from the book and link them to some personal experiences and some observations, and then hopefully wrap up with some considerations for application. So I kind of have an outline in terms of what I want to talk about. I may get thrown off my notes towards the end. It might get a little messy, but I think we'll be fine. So before I get into the reading of the passage and providing some context and background, what I wanted to do first was kind of break down the word jurisdiction because it will really help us understand everything else better, and like just some of the insights, and then when I ask about how to apply it in your life and things like that, I think it'll just make a little bit more sense. So growing up, when I first heard this word jurisdiction, to me, it always seemed to be in the context of the law or someone being arrested or something like that. So maybe the word was used in a sentence similar to something like "You have no jurisdiction here." So, for example, in one of my favorite movies, the movie Heat, there's a scene where Al Pacino has to go to, well, Al Pacino's character, Vincent Hanna, he has to go to another state to kind of arrest this guy that he actually wants him to work for him to catch these bad guys. And then this guy tells him, um, he tells them, "Wait, you're from LA. This is Arizona. You have no jurisdiction here." So if you break the word down, this word jurisdiction, we look at the first part, the word juris, and that pertains to the law or some official legal power to make decisions. And then the word diction, which means the choice of words and phrases used in speech or writing. So maybe if we put the words together, it means specific speech or phrases that relate to the law or legal matters. But more importantly, jurisdiction, it gives an individual a special kind of authority in a particular place. It may grant them special rights and privileges that others don't have because they don't have jurisdiction there. Um, what's also helpful to know is the work that Father Boyles does with Homeboy Industries, and that's to rehabilitate gang members and ex-gang members in a variety of ways by helping them get jobs, by visiting them in jail, doing tattoo removal, maybe helping them with, social skills or things like that. I know there's one I was reading yesterday. One thing that they do is they have like a clothes closet called New Image. And if there's anybody that needs some clothes, well, they can go to the clothes closet and get that. And so, a little bit, really brief, in terms of the work that Homeboy Industries does. You can go ahead and Google them, and you'll find everything that they do. It's pretty extensive, and they've been around for a very long time. So I want to get into the text now. And when I first read this, I really I really enjoyed it because I can see this kind of happening. The way that he writes it, I think, is very visual. And so let me just go ahead and read it and to give some background. So you already know that Father Boyles, or as he's known on the streets, they call him G Dog. He's in the barrios a lot. He's working with these gang members, with the homies, and there's so many stories in this book. This one really stood out to me because of the word jurisdiction, and then some of the other things that he explains and talks about. And then I just couldn't help but think about the word and applying it in my life, and um, considering that others could think about it also in their lives. So let me go ahead and read the text. So this is about a guy named Junior. Junior is in his 40s. Okay, so let me just read some passages here, and then I'll just keep I'll keep going on with the podcast. So he says, see, it says, Junior, they wouldn't leave their posts until they saw their kids walk into class. Closer to my office and before the alley was Junior's apartment. In his 40s, Junior drank, quote, 40s all day. He'd be nursing a large cold one even at 7:30 a.m. As I arrived to open Homeboy Industries, most days you'd see him hanging out his window on the second floor, shirtless, no matter the weather. He was wiry and feisty, and despite my 2 decades of urging recovery on him, alcohol didn't seem to obscure his goodness. It pickled it. It was as out there as his shirtless torso surveying the world from the second floor. So these two were not strangers. One day, as I'm walking past, lost in my thoughts, I failed to see him. Then, after I had gone beyond his apartment and the alley, Junior screams full throttle, "Love you, G Dog." This stops me in my tracks, as it does a few other people. I'm always startled by the ready way folks and homies tell you that they love you. This was not always so available to me in my own Irish Catholic background. You knew people loved you, but words never brought you to that knowledge. In the barrio, people tell you. I retrace my steps and am now standing under his window, looking up. Thank you, Junior. That was a very nice thing to say. Junior waves me on as if papally blessing me as my day begins. Oh, come on now, G. You know, he says, spinning his hand in a circular motion. You're in my jurisdiction. Um, so maybe ordinarily we wouldn't assume that maybe a guy like Junior in his 40s, who's drinking 40s all day, would be open to this type of vocal, vulnerable, um, just expression of his appreciation for somebody else. You know, for him to yell something like that just out in the public, I think it really probably just speaks to the presence of these two people in their lives. But here's really where we start to dig in on this word jurisdiction. This guy knew that he was in a safe place. He knew that he was in a familiar place. He knew that he was in a place where he had jurisdiction. Boyle's Father Boyle, he goes on to write, we all need to see that we are in each other's jurisdictions or spheres of acceptance only all the time. For example, in your home, you have jurisdiction. You know, maybe right now in your head you can hear the phrase. Maybe you've said it as a parent, or maybe you remember being told, "Because it's my house." You know, when I've heard that phrase, it always spoke to jurisdiction. I have authority here. What I say goes. Um, but what happens when we're out in society? When we're at work, when you're in the classroom, or you're in a gathering of some sort, who has jurisdiction then? So, as I was taking my notes earlier today and I was thinking about this, I couldn't help but think of online conversation threads that you see in posts or whatever on social media. One reason a lot of these comments are so terrible is because everyone feels they have jurisdiction and authority. They can say whatever they want, wherever and to whoever, and there are no consequences for the most part. And so there seems to be a conversation to be had for how one manages their jurisdiction, like wherever you find yourself at. How do you handle that? How do you manage it? So we either create an environment that welcomes people in, or one that excludes others. Boyles writes, yet there are lines that get drawn and barriers erected, meant only to exclude. These barriers, these lines that get drawn, they have many shapes and forms, and you can probably think about many of them. They're political, they're social, they're religious, they could be racial, um, they could be based on socioeconomic status. Um, there's a lot out there, and and they're not, nor are they hard to find. Probably in any social context that you may find yourself in, you could probably see some of these lines, although invisible. You can sense them. You can see how people, to one degree or another, are excluded, um, and that's not a good thing. And so some people want nothing. So when it comes to jurisdictions, just some things to think about. Um, some people don't want access to the jurisdictions of others. Sometimes there's that rugged individualism kind of idea where, and there's nothing wrong with that. As good old Briscoe Darling used to say from the Andy Griffith Show, more power to you. We all have the autonomy to decide for ourselves what spheres we want to enter in, and also what spheres that we want to try to be a part of. And so, when it comes to jurisdictions, there's that to think about in terms of how you are managing yours and how you look at perhaps the jurisdictions of others. And you ask, how could I enter this sphere to maybe, and this is like really like the important part, to get to know other people, to get to know someone else's story, um, regardless of the tension that we may often feel, knowing that our values don't align with the values of someone else. There's always a good reminder to hold that tension, whatever the conflict it is or whatever separates people. Let's just kind of move that to the side if we can and try to get to know people. Um, so, some more questions here. Uh, when it comes to excluding others and jurisdiction, I think it's important to reflect on some questions. Number one, have I built barriers that keep others from entering my jurisdiction? And what are those? How do I dismantle what I have built to keep others out? How can I hold on to my personal values while also inviting others in order to share my values and to be more human? And then also consider this question: are you fine with living the rest of your life with people that only think like you and look like you and talk like you and live like you? And as I thought about that earlier today, I said that's not the case for me. This doesn't mean I'm rejecting values that are very important to me, um, or that I'm becoming like others, but I'm simply saying that I'm curious about the lives of other human beings, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. Oftentimes, um, our curiosity could lead us to have conversations with individuals, and we find that we have something in common. And a lot of times, those commonalities are they're very strong. They're a good place to begin to build relationships with individuals, but it takes work. It takes work. Um, so continuing with a passage from the book, Boyles writes, "This is also largely the problem in the groupthink of gangs. They just can't seem to see one another as residing in the same jurisdiction. We are the guys who hate those guys is the self-defining assertion of every gang. The challenge is getting them to abandon the territory of their gang and replace it with a turf more ample, inclusive, and as expansive as God's own view of things." And as I was reading that earlier, I was thinking of just division in general. You may not be in a gang, you may not wear blue or red or be throwing up, um, gang graffiti up or anything like that. But are you in some group that is opposed to some other group and in any shape or form? It may be its ideology. It could be a number of things. And so, if that's the case, there can be uh, this element of groupthink, which, if you think about it, often keeps us within our jurisdictions where we We just want to remain there and be insular and just worry about our own little world and our own little jurisdiction, and we exclude others. And that doesn't necessarily breed understanding. I know one thing in my English classroom, when we have discussions and we discuss all topics, I always tell my students, um, you probably already have conclusions drawn about a number of issues, but as we discuss things in the classroom, let's work on building understanding between all of us, because we're all allowed to have a different opinion. Um, let's work to understand the opinions of others, and let's get some clarity when it comes to these issues, and let's be fine with there's a little bit of tension, but at least I'm understanding where somebody else is coming from. I don't have to agree with where they're coming from if I have my own values, but at least I'm understanding where they're coming from. So I wanted to get into just a couple of experiences that I've had with just this idea of jurisdiction, and some other questions. So, just one thing that I was thinking about as I was reading this and just reflecting, just the whole idea of, when you're in someone else's jurisdiction, you're kind of at their mercy. And it's kind of like, when you go to someone else's house, um, their rules kind of dictate, and that's fine. Like, if they have a protocol about taking your shoes off, like you should probably take your shoes off. If they have other protocols, like if they prefer that you use a coaster, if you have a drink, hey, use the coaster. Be a good guest. So they have jurisdiction there. Like, this is how they like things done in their home, and so there's this idea again that when you're in someone else's jurisdiction, you're kind of at their mercy. And so here's a story that kind of shows that. Couple, no, more than a couple years ago, maybe like 6 years ago or something like that. I worked with English learners at the high school that I work at, and when you work with English learners, you often have to make home visits. And during these home visits, you have to take some paperwork, and you talk to the parent or guardian about the progress of their student, and then at the end of that, you have them sign some documents so that it's all official and that you made the home visit and all that. So it was a Friday. I was going to go visit this mother. Well, she had two boys. They were both in my class, and so I set the appointment for something like maybe 4 o'clock. And in my mind, I was not going to be there long, maybe 20 minutes at the most. And so I called my interpreter friend. He met me there because the mother, she didn't speak English. She was from uh, Ethiopia or Eritrea. Um, I don't remember exactly, but one of those. And so he was there when I showed up, and then I showed up, and we walked in, and I knew I was going to have to take my shoes off because I knew that this was a protocol because the family was Muslim. And so did that. And so sat down, and one of the first things that the mother did was she offered me some orange juice, and I said yes, and it was a uh, really big glass of orange juice that she gave me. But and I failed to mention though, when I walked into the house, it was warm and it was thick with the smell of food, and it was thick with the smell of um, coffee beans, as if she was just roasting coffee beans for us. And so sat there waiting, and then I was talking to my interpreter friend, and I said, "So when can I start talking to her about the stuff for the talk, the discussion, for the documents?" And he's like, "You don't just start talking. You have to. This is relationship. This is hospitality. You can't talk about this stuff until like the third cup of coffee." And I'm like, okay, like this was new, but it was a good new, like I wasn't used to this. And so um, I wasn't there for just 20 minutes that day. I was there for about an hour and a half. I was there for about an hour and a half. I was in her home. She had jurisdiction. She had the authority in this home, but she managed that, um, married to hospitality and married to this idea of building relationship with someone, even briefly, before we got to like these documents. And I thought that that was so just opposed to like the Western way of just kind of thinking like, I'm here for this, please sign this, I got to go have a good weekend. um, so we had our coffee, and then after the coffee it was a meal. It was injera. If you know what injera is, it's good. And it was like there was some meat and like some hard-boiled eggs, and it was truly a buffet for me and my interpreter friend. And again, I was there for an hour and a half. My expectation was to be there for 20 minutes, but I feel like that experience really kind of, as I think about it now, I put this understanding of jurisdiction, on that, because she used her place to build relationship with me, um, before we got down to the business of talking about the progress of her students in my English class. Um, so that really stood out to me. And just some other questions. What does this mean when someone says you have no when someone says you have no jurisdiction here? It means that you have no say, you have no authority in this area. To go back to the original passage, when Junior sees G Dog and he tells him that he loves him, and he says, "You're in my jurisdiction." Um, I just think that that was so neat that this guy can just out loud tell this guy that he appreciates, "Hey, I love you," and then he's not self conscious about it. He's like, "I'm gonna say it. I want to say it. Who's gonna tell me anything?" Um, and so I think that's just a really neat story. And then another question is, what does your jurisdiction say about you and your values? Again, I'm going to go to the home example because I think that's an easy one that we can all find ourselves in. Is, if you have guests in your home, how does your attention to them? Uh, what does that say about your values? Um, Also, in terms of like relationships, for example, I had a date night with my oldest daughter a couple weeks ago, and we were talking a lot, and she was sharing a lot with me, and it was really good because, she has a perspective as my daughter that I don't have as a father of me. So it was really good to hear things from her. And so in that time that we had together, it was important that I set a safe jurisdiction there, so that she felt that this time that we had together was safe. I could tell dad anything and he'll listen. And again, moments like that take a lot of intentionality, a lot of planning, a lot of prayer. If you know what, I think my child's gonna maybe give me some criticism, and am I mature enough to, number one, take it, number two, listen to it, number three, ask, is that right of me, is that correct of me, is her description of me, is her appraisal of me, is her evaluation of me, is it on point? Because if it is, then you got to do something about that. Especially if, a child sees it and hey, they communicate it to you with tact. um, that's the kind of relationship that builds safety, because ultimately, anything that your kids are going through, anything that they're feeling, you want to be able to help them deal with that in a positive way. um, Also, I couldn't help but take this idea of jurisdiction and apply it to the classroom, because I am a classroom teacher. And so I said, as a classroom teacher, what does my jurisdiction say about me? Like, what's the climate in my classroom? Um, Is it one where it makes students comfortable? Is it one where they feel safe, where they know that they'll be heard? Um, that's really important. I'll tell a quick story without saying names because I know that I might have teachers from my school watch this, and if you are, hello. But like, I have one teacher friend there I'm really close to, and man, I could go to this person's room at lunch, and it's just filled. It's filled with kids. It's filled with students because the climate there is it's it's welcoming, it's friendly, it's one where students want to be in, and this speaks to how this teacher manages their area, manages their jurisdiction in this building, even if it's just one room. And that's not just something that's built um, in a week or in a month. This type of uh, knowing that a particular place is a place of refuge or a place of safety, it's a cool place to hang out and chill out. Man, that just starts from a long time ago, from like the jump. And so, as a classroom teacher, I just think it's also important to consider that, um, and to know that if you can do things better in your classroom, that there's nothing wrong with doing that. And so I definitely see a connection between jurisdiction uh, when it comes to teaching and when it comes to what kind of climate you have in your classroom. To kind of wrap things up, I wanted to share one more story from the book, and this one is about a guy named Travieso. And if you know Spanish, you know that if you're a travieso, man, you're getting in trouble. You're probably doing a lot of things that you shouldn't be. You're kind of like a pest. Um, you don't want to be known as a travieso. I mean, it's a pretty cool like gang name if you're into gangs or whatever. But other than that, it's not cool to be a travieso. So I'm looking at the book here, see where I marked it. So let's see. So I'm just going to start from here, and hopefully I'll remember why I marked this and why I wanted to talk about it. So I'm just going to read. It says, some 6 months later, Travieso finds himself surrounded in an alley, greatly outnumbered by members of an enemy gang who beat him badly. While he's lying there, they will not stop kicking his head in until he is still and lifeless, and then they leave him. Someone gets him to White Memorial Hospital where he is declared brain dead and left on life support. The doctors wait for 48 hours to secure a flat read, and then they can officially declare him deceased. This allows time for relatives to journey to Los Angeles. I am speaking at St. Louis University and fly home. I have seen a great deal of horrifying things in my lifetime. Nothing, however, compares to the sight of this kid, a wonderfully gentle souled kid, with his head swollen many times its size. It is breathtaking. I can barely keep my eyes trained on him as I smear sacred oil on his forehead, and we say goodbye in the pull of a plug. It should be noted that one thing that Homeboy Industries does when it gives gang members and ex-gang members employment, they often have to work with rival gang members. And Father Boyles tells them, hey, this is a job. If you guys can't work with each other, tell me now because there's a line of homies that will work. And so rival gang members have to, at some point, come to a place where they're able to work together. Maybe they're not best of friends. Maybe they're not talking, hanging out, having lunch together, but they got to work together. Okay, back to the text really quick. It says, in those first 24 hours after his death, I am in my office late at night and the phone rings. It's Clever. And Clever was rival gang member of this guy Travieso. Hey, he begins awkwardly. That's messed up about what happened to Travieso. Yeah, it is, I say to him. Brought back to this hollow area of my soul which this sadness has carved. Is there anything I can do? Clever asks with oddly high energy. Can I give him my blood? This last offer sucks the breathable air out of the atmosphere for both of us. We can each feel the other tremble in silence. Clever takes the lead and punctures the quiet, with great resolve and unprotected tears. He was not my enemy, he was my friend. We worked together. And I think I wanted to talk about that and end with that because uh, because often, like with gangs fighting for turf, right? It's like this is my land and that's your area and this is my neighborhood and that's your neighborhood, and if you come into my neighborhood, like there'll be problems, things like this, things we already know. Um, but when these guys were forced to work together, all of that all of that kind of went away, you know. Um, and what this really speaks to is this idea of when you get close to a lot of things that you don't understand, or when you get close to a group that you're not familiar with and you begin to actually know who they are and what they believe and what they value, um, you come to learn that they're just people just like you. And that doesn't necessarily, again, mean that you're going to, leave behind your values or anything like this. But there is a bond and a kinship that just develops. And there is, I'm sorry, now that I think about it, there was one more little thing that I wanted to add. But in this case, hey, this guy Clever was a rival gang member with this guy Travieso. And when he died, he felt it too. This wasn't just someone that didn't leave an imprint on Clever's life, because he did, and he felt that loss. Um, where is that last little note that I made to myself? Hold on. Maybe it's in my notes here. Can't think of it. I think ultimately it had to do with this responsibility of what we are to each other, like this idea um, of is there any kind of humanness that we owe each other? Maybe not owe. Maybe that's the wrong word, but maybe responsibility for each other. Maybe the way that this kid Clever felt like he wanted to do something for Travieso. Travieso was dead. He died. But he felt like he still wanted to do something and to give something of himself to this guy that passed away. Um, and so those were just some thoughts that I had from reading one passage and then reading some others, and just thinking about this idea of jurisdiction and how we see it in this passage, how I thought it was cool, um, how some of these personal experiences maybe relate to that, but then also to get you as a listener just to consider like your jurisdiction, like wherever you find yourself being, where you have some sort of authority or control, a place where you're kind of in charge of. And um, if there are barriers that kind of exclude people out, maybe just to be aware of what those things are. Is it possible maybe to put some of those things down in order to let others in? And, in 2023, if we just apply that idea on a large scale in terms of like society, what does that look like? What does that look like for um, groups that have major conflicts when it comes to ideology, or political differences, or just anything else? You name it, they're out there, Um, but I think if we're able to at least consider these things, think about maybe making a change, not like 180-degree change, but is there like a 1% change that can be done in this area? I think it would be a good thing. Um, if you have read James Clear's Atomic Habits early in the book, he talks about progress. Even if you're making a 1% change every day, hey, over 30 days, it's 30%. Like that's a lot. And so As I end, if that just gives you some food for thought, then I hope it does. And thanks for checking in. Thanks for checking out the podcast today. I rambled a lot, I think I tried to stay on point. I hope you liked the video. I hope you'll share it with others. I hope you will leave some comments, and certainly please like the video and subscribe. Thank you very much, and we'll see you guys next time.